Hello guys. Tonight's story isn't about marble forums or crimson cloaks. It's about something heavier. Grain dust in the air, firelight dancing on soot-stained walls, the slow rhythm of hands shaping dough before dawn. This is the kind of history you don't read on monuments. You breathe it in, thick with ash and yeast. You feel it in the ache of your shoulders and the silence before the first crow caws over the rooftops of Rome. So before you drift off, consider leaving a like if this story earns it, and subscribe if whispers of ancient lives help lull you towards sleep. Now, ease into the dark. Turn down the lights. Maybe lie back, close your eyes. Because tonight, you are not a senator, not a general, not a gladiator cheered by crowds. You are something far more essential and far more forgotten. You wake in a bakery. You wake in ancient Rome. And the ovens are already roaring. Imagine this. You don't wake in a bed. You wake on the floor of a Roman bakery. Smooth stone under your back, your hip pressed against a canvas sack of grain. The sack is warm. Not because of comfort, but because it held your body heat through the short hours of sleep. Around you, the air is heavy with the scent of flour and yesterday's smoke. Your blanket is a rough piece of wool, crusted at the edges with dust and old ash. You tug it off slowly, careful not to shake loose too much powder into the air. Every inhale is already thick with the memory of baking. There's no rooster, no bell to mark the beginning of your day. You know it's time because of the heat. It hums beneath you, faint at first, like a heartbeat deep under the stone, but growing. The ovens were never truly cold. Someone rose earlier than you, maybe the old man with the broken ankle, or one of the boys too green to grumble yet. They've stoked the fire just enough to stir the coals back into life. You sit up. Your tunic is already grey with flour, your hands cracked from yesterday's dough. Your feet find your sandals, stiff leather, warped from years of sweat and ash. You rub the sleep from your eyes with the back of your hand and stand, slowly. No one speaks. There are others sleeping here, in corners, behind crates, curled between sacks and baskets. Bakers, apprentices, slaves, all caught in the same rhythm. The ones who live elsewhere will arrive soon, yawning and cursing the chill of the morning air. But for now, the bakery belongs to the fire and to silence. You cross the floor, the grit of old flour biting against your soles. The light is thin, not from the sun, but from the ovens. A dull orange glow leaks from the open mouths of stone chambers taller than a man. They line one wall, their rounded backs arching into the gloom like sleeping beasts. As you approach, you feel the temperature climb, dry, intense, alive. You kneel, and with practiced hands, feed the flames. Olive wood, mostly. Dry kindling, scraps from the market. A few handfuls of charcoal when the supply runs thin. The fire catches quickly. It always does in these ovens. You can feel it in your skin, even as you turn your face away. Your arms are marked by years of this work. Burns, pale patches where the heat has stolen sensation. A long scar along your right forearm from when a paddle slipped and your skin kissed the stone lip of the oven. You carry those marks the way others wear rings or cloaks, with a quiet sort of pride. Not because they're beautiful, but because they're proof. Proof that you belong here, that you feed this city, and that the day has begun. The fire is ready. It speaks in hisses and low cracks, licking the insides of the stone ovens like an animal coming to life. You step back from the heat, sweat already beading along your hairline. It's not even dawn yet. but the day has begun to press itself against your skin. You move to the work table, a scarred wooden surface smoothed by years of hands like yours. You brush it down with the flat of your palm, not for cleanliness, it will never be clean, but to feel it, to center yourself, to remember where you are and why. Beside you, barrels and sacks lean in the shadows. Wheat flour, if you're lucky. If not, barley, spelt, coarse grain from North Africa or Gaul. Today's mix is middling, a blend of ground wheat swept from the floor of a granary, stretched with ground lupine beans, and stale crumbs reconstituted with water. It will hold together. You pour a measure onto the table. There is no scale, only the knowledge that lives in your body. Your hands are your measure. The way the dough pulls at your palms tells you more than any tool ever could. A little water, a pinch of salt, if rationed. Yeast, perhaps, or a scoop from the previous batch. Sourdough before the word existed. You press the mix together with slow, steady motions, kneading. Not with flair, not with pride, but with the patient, muscle-deep movement of a person who has done this every day for years. Fold, press, turn, fold, press, turn. The same gestures again and again, until your arms ache and the dough begins to breathe. You don't look up. Around you, others do the same. The bakery hums with soft, wordless sound. Grunts, creaking wood, the slap of dough against board. No one talks unless necessary. The work is language enough. You prepare loaves not for yourself, but for the city. You will not eat this bread. It is weighed, counted, and claimed before it ever leaves your hands. Contracts with the state, deliveries to barracks, rations for the graindle. Rome's belly is vast, and your job is to keep it full. Sometimes you stretch the mix with sawdust. It's frowned upon. But when grain is low, what choice is there? A little added texture in the crust, a little less flavor. Most won't notice. And if they do, they rarely complain to you. They complain to the man at the counter or the servant who delivered it. And the fire doesn't care either way. Once the dough is ready, it must rest. Covered with linen, stacked in shallow baskets, the loaves rise as the heat deepens. You take this moment to breathe, not rest. There's no time for that. But to check the oven walls, scrape down the ashes, wipe sweat from your brow with the hem of your tunic. You prepare the paddles, long-handled, wide-bladed tools that reach deep into the furnace. They're splintered, worn. One is wrapped in a strip of cloth, a temporary repair from yesterday's crack. You don't replace things unless you must. Wood is precious. Time, even more so. Soon, the dough will be ready, and the heat will call again. The loaves are shaped by hand. Round, compact, scored with a sharp edge to let the steam escape and control the rise. Some are pressed with stamps, wooden or bronze seals, carved with symbols, initials, or the name of a patron. This isn't decoration. It's proof of ownership, proof of responsibility. If a citizen receives a burned loaf, or a ration isn't delivered on time, that mark tells them who to blame. And blame comes quickly in Rome. You slide the loaves onto a long wooden peel, the paddle. You carry it like a soldier might carry a spear, long, awkward, and dangerous if used carelessly. You've seen boys burn themselves to the bone by getting too close, by hesitating just a second too long when placing the dough. You guide the loaves into the oven's throat, not too close to the flames, not too far from the walls. Placement matters. Heat is not even, not reliable. You watch for the shimmer in the air, the way the crust begins to blister. You know which side of each oven runs hotter, which one has a cracked stone underfoot that shifts when you lean too far. And always the fire talks to you, not in words, in breath, in scent, the faint change from raw flour to crust, from pale to golden. You can smell when a loaf is done. You can smell when it's over baking. Your arms are already sore, not from the weight, you're used to weight, but from the posture, the reach, the way the paddle pulls at your shoulder as you slide it in and out of the oven, again and again. You swap hands, switch grips, stretch your back between turns. It never gets easier. It just becomes familiar. When the bread is done, it's removed quickly. Scorch marks on the crust are expected, even appreciated by some. It adds flavor, texture, but too much, and you'll hear about it. Rome is a city where even a crust can be political. You load the loaves into reed baskets lined with cloth. Each delivery has its own route. One boy takes a stack to the granary. Another heads toward the subura, where the poor line up in early light for their daily allotment. You're taking yours to the market district, a mix of private orders and vendors. The street outside is still cool. The sky is pale, smeared with low clouds, but already the sound of the city begins to swell. Iron cartwheels on stone, voices calling out wares, animals braying in pens. You shoulder the basket and step out into it all. The bread is warm against your side. You move through alleyways and wide avenues, past temples with their marble silence and tenements stacked like kindling. Children chase dogs. Vendors argue. A woman pours water into a cracked jug, her bare feet coated in dust. No one looks at you. No one thanks you. You are part of the background, expected, necessary, invisible. You deliver the loaves, counting them out carefully. At one house, the steward sniffs a crust and frowns. He doesn't speak, but makes a note. At another, a slave takes the basket without a glance, tossing a single coin back toward your feet. You don't pick it up. Not yet. Not until the gate closes. You bend, pocket the coin, and move on. The city is fed, for now. And your day, though far from over, is already written in ash and flour. Imagine now a different morning. The oven still raw. The dough still sticks beneath your fingernails. But this bakery, larger, more organized, hums with purpose. Men move like parts of a great mechanism. Orders are shouted, weighed, recorded. This is no back alley shop. This is a baking empire, and at its head, a name. Marcus Virgilius Eurysaces. It sounds Roman, doesn't it? But he wasn't born that way. Eurysaces began as a slave, not an uncommon origin in Rome, especially for laborers. But what sets him apart is not how he started, but what he built. You've likely never heard of him, and yet his tomb still stands, more than 2,000 years later. Not in a cemetery or hidden in ruins, but right beside one of Rome's busiest ancient roads, the Via Prenestina, near the old Porta Maggiore. It rises like an oven itself, a monument made not to war, not to poetry, but to bread. And it tells us more about Roman ambition than 1,000 statues ever could. Now, step out of the shadows of the smoky bakery floor. Lift your gaze from the dough beneath your fingers, from the endless repetition of fold and press, from the ache in your back that you've carried since boyhood, and imagine that one day your name becomes a monument, not your master's name, not the name of the noble you serve, your name. It's carved into stone, bold and defiant, facing one of the busiest roads in the Roman Empire. Thousands pass it daily, travelers, merchants, senators, soldiers. They read it. They remember it. Marcus Virgilius Eurysaces. It is a name that doesn't come from birthright. It comes from flour, from fire, from the rhythm of the baker's craft. Eurysaces wasn't born into wealth. He wasn't even born free. His name tells us that. Eurysaces, likely Greek in origin, foreign, possibly from the eastern provinces, perhaps a prisoner of war, perhaps bought in a slave market. We don't know the details. Rome rarely cared enough to write down the full lives of men like him. But what we do know is what he built. His tomb is like no other in Rome. Massive, cylindrical, functional, and unmistakably proud of what it represents. Not a general's victory arch, not a poet's delicate marble urn, but a baker's tomb, and one shaped like the tools of his trade. 12 great drums, thought to represent kneading basins or flour sieves, encircled the monument's upper levels. The structure stands tall, blocky, and strange. Even by Roman standards, it draws the eye. And just beneath its cornice, a carved frieze. It doesn't show battles or gods. It shows bread. The entire process, from grain being milled by donkey-powered machines to dough being mixed by hand, weighed on balances, shaped into loaves, and finally fed into the mouths of roaring ovens. In every panel, there's motion, work, the rhythm of labor etched into stone, preserved against the erosion of time. It's almost impossible to believe. A freedman, once a slave, building a monument that proudly displays not what he consumed, but what he created. Bread, not a metaphor, not a symbol. Literal bread, the food that fed Rome and the craft that made him rich. Eurysaces didn't pretend to be something he wasn't. He didn't try to erase his past. He made it immortal. To understand the weight of Eurysaces' story, you have to understand what it meant to be a slave in Rome. Slavery wasn't hidden, and it wasn't rare. It was woven into every layer of society, from the manservant polishing silver at a senator's villa to the nameless backs bent over millstones in the belly of a bakery. Slaves could be born into bondage or captured during Rome's endless wars. They could be sold in markets, inherited, gifted, punished. Their lives were property, and their fates often sealed. But Rome had something few slave systems in history allowed: a path to freedom. It wasn't easy, and it certainly wasn't equal, but it was there. A slave could earn or be granted manumission, legal release, often after years of loyal service or careful savings. Sometimes it came in old age, sometimes as a reward. Sometimes a master would set terms, a price to be paid, a task to be fulfilled. We don't know how Eurysaces earned his liberty, but earn it he did. And when he walked free, he didn't disappear into anonymity. He began building something, a business. You can picture it. He returns to the same ovens he once tended as property, but now with new eyes, not just to bake, but to manage, to expand, to hire, to turn what he knows into something more. Bread is not just sustenance. In Rome, it is politics, economy, control. And Eurysaces understood this. He became a contractor, perhaps even working directly with the state, supplying grain dole bread, military rations, or provisions for state events. He might have had teams of bakers beneath him, dozens of workers grinding grain, shaping loaves, running deliveries. From the shadows of servitude, he rose into the light of commerce, still dusty with flour, still marked by the tools of labor, but free, and more than free, successful. He could have stopped there, lived quietly, passed his fortune on to children, melted into the swelling class of freedmen trying to climb the Roman ladder. But he didn't. He chose to carve his name into stone, not out of vanity, though some later Romans scoffed at his tomb's odd design, but because he wanted the world to remember that a baker had mattered, that a man once owned could own something greater, that from flour and fire, legacy could rise. If you walk the Via Prenestina today, past the ruins of ancient aqueducts and the tangled sprawl of modern Rome, you'll see it, not hidden, not crumbling in shadow, standing boldly beside the old Porta Maggiore, right along the road where carts once rattled and citizens poured in and out of the city gates. The tomb of Eurysaces. It doesn't blend in. It doesn't whisper. It speaks with the same clarity as a fresh loaf on a cold morning. Honest, practical, and impossible to ignore. Its base is a solid rectangle, but rising above that are 12 great cylindrical shapes, hollowed at the ends. Most scholars believe these represent either grain-measuring vessels or dough-kneading basins, the tools of the baker's trade. Stacked and repeated, they create a strange but strangely fitting rhythm, as if the tomb itself is preparing another batch, forever waiting to feed the next passing traveller. The material is travertine, pale, porous, weather-worn, not marble, not gilded, strong and sensible, like bread. In the centre, carved into a prominent panel, is an inscription. The Latin is simple, direct, no florid verses, no references to gods or noble lineage. It reads, Esto hoc monumentum, Marce Virgile, Eurysacis, Pistoris, Redemptoris apparet. This is the monument of Marcus Virgilius Eurysaces, baker, contractor, public servant. He doesn't call himself a hero, or a sage, or a beloved father. He calls himself what he was, a baker. It's bold, almost defiant. In a culture obsessed with lineage and elite status, to proudly announce your profession, especially one so rooted in labour, was unusual. But Eurysaces didn't flinch. He baked for the people. He rose through smoke and grain, and he built a tomb to ensure no one forgot. The frieze, that carved strip of images circling the monument, is what makes the tomb truly unique. It doesn't show gods, it shows labour. In frame after frame, stone figures lift sacks, pour flour, stir dough, carry baskets. Men weigh loaves on balanced scales. Others tend to donkeys, grind grain, sweep the floors. The ovens are open, rounded and detailed, with loaves visible within. It's not idealized. It's not mythologized. It's honest. You can feel the rhythm of the bakery in each carved line. Fold, press, turn. Again and again. The images don't center Eurysaces. They center the work. They honor the process. They elevate something that, for most, was invisible. The Roman elite built tombs to remind the world of their victories. Eurysaces built one to remind the world that bread matters, that hands matter, that those who rise before dawn and sleep beside ovens are not forgettable. They are Rome. And in that quiet assertion, he becomes more than just a man. He becomes a symbol. The tomb of Eurysaces stands tall, unmissable. But if you look closely, there's another name, partially lost to time, just beside his. Atistia, his wife. Her name is less complete, damaged, perhaps deliberately, perhaps by weather and neglect. But what survives tells a quiet story. An urn was found nearby, believed to be hers. Simple. Shaped not like a statue or a treasure chest, but like a breadbasket. Hollowed, domed, and lined with a pattern that looks like woven reeds. It was discovered within the tomb complex, alongside Eurysaces. She wasn't forgotten. She was laid to rest where the ovens turned, where the loaves rose, where her husband carved his legacy. We don't know much about Atistia. Roman records rarely preserve the details of women, especially those not born into elite families. But her presence in this story is telling. Her name is carved with pride, not as an afterthought, but as part of the monument statement. Not beloved wife, not mother of sons, just Atistia, as if her name alone beside her husband's was enough. She may have worked beside him. She may have helped run the business, managed workers, supervised deliveries. In many Roman artisan households, women took part in the trade. They handled finances, negotiated contracts, trained apprentices. They were the unseen half of many ventures, especially among freedmen, where survival demanded cooperation. Perhaps Atistia kneaded dough with him in the early days. Perhaps she counted coins late into the night, while the ovens cooled and the air still smelled of scorched crust. Or maybe she simply shared his life. The heat, the grind, the risk. Enough that when the time came, she, too, was honored in stone and ash. There's a kind of intimacy in that. Not poetry, not flowers, but a tomb where both their names remain, still touched by the sun, still passed by strangers on the road. Together in death, together in bread. Eurysaces built a tomb that made a statement, but not everyone approved of what it said. To the Roman elite, those born into wealth, who traced their bloodlines to ancient senators and gods, the idea of a baker, a freedman, rising high and carving his name in public stone. It wasn't just unusual. It was unsettling. Success was one thing, but visibility, pride, a monument that didn't whisper humility but shouted profession, that was something else entirely. The Romans had a word for it. Nouveau riche. New money. Freedmen like Eurysaces who had clawed their way up through grit and trade. They were mocked in literature, in satire. Writers like Juvenal and Martial scribbled insults into verses, imagining these men as tasteless, vulgar, obsessed with wealth, clueless about dignity. They wore too much gold. They hosted garish banquets. They tried too hard. Of course, it was the elite who decided what too hard looked like. To them, real status was quiet, inherited, undisputed. A baker building a tomb larger than many noblemen's. That was audacity. Even the tomb's location made a point, right by the road, in clear view of the city's travelers. Not hidden away in some modest cemetery plot. Not nestled among family tombs with delicate inscriptions. Number this tomb declared itself. I was a baker. I rose. I mattered. Some scholars believe the very oddness of the design, those great cylinders stacked around the top, may have been part of the elite reaction, that the strange form was considered excessive, lacking refinement. They may have laughed, but they didn't tear it down. And even if they scorned it, they remembered it, because that's the quiet genius of Eurysaces. He didn't need approval. He built permanence. He built something no ridicule could erase. And 2,000 years later, it's not the senators' tombs that stand in travelers' guidebooks. It's the bakers. So what remains of Marcus Virgilius Eurysaces? Not just a name carved in travertine. Not just a strange tomb on a dusty roadside. What remains is something deeper. A legacy written in fire and flour. The man himself is long gone. His hands, once scarred from oven heat, once busy weighing dough and counting coins, are dust. The bakery he built is no longer standing. The ovens are cold, the loaves long eaten, and yet the tomb still stands. The frieze still tells its story. In its quiet, workmanlike way, it outlasts the marble masks of generals and the silent pedestals of forgotten nobles. It endures. It reminds us that Rome was not just senators in white togas, not just armies on campaign or emperors demanding statues of themselves. Rome was also men like Eurybates, men who rose early, who worked with their bodies, who fed the empire and asked no favor but the right to be remembered for who they truly were. It tells us that greatness doesn't always wear a crown. Sometimes it wears a flour-dusted tunic. Sometimes it kneads dough before dawn. And sometimes it builds a tomb not to boast, but to prove. I was here. I mattered. I baked for Rome. And Rome remembered. Imagine silence. Not the silence of night or of sleep, but the deep, suspended silence of a place forgotten by time. A room where the air hasn't stirred in centuries. Where every object sits exactly where it was left. Not hours ago, but millennia. Now imagine stepping into that silence. In 1748, near the Bay of Naples, shovels scraped through soft volcanic ash, and the world rediscovered a city frozen in time. Pompeii. And within it, bakeries. Real ones. Not ruins stripped by time, not foundations buried beneath new cities, but actual Roman bakeries, intact, as if the bakers had only just stepped outside for a breath of air. There were ovens still black with soot, flour-stained counters, millstones, even baskets and wooden tools preserved by the heat and weight of the ash that had killed the city, and by accident protected it. In one bakery, archaeologists found more than 200 loaves. They found rhythm. The layout was functional. A back room for grinding grain, a central work area for kneading and shaping dough, a wide, rounded oven built from brick and stone, open-mouthed and blackened by centuries of fire. In the corners, millstones stood in pairs, conical stones set into wider bases, used to grind grain into flour. They were turned not by water, but by muscle, and not human muscle. Donkey muscle. The archaeologists found narrow stone corridors where donkeys were once harnessed and blindfolded. These animals were walked in slow, endless circles, turning the heavy stones with each step. Some believe they were guided with flicks of rope or shouted commands, always moving, always grinding. Marks in the stone floor show where their hooves wore deep paths. They never stopped, not until the sky fell in fire. Among all the ruins of Pompeii, few discoveries feel as strange, or as human, as the bread. Yes, bread. Not drawings of it, not references in texts. Actual loaves, dozens of them, perfectly preserved, blackened but intact, found still inside the ovens where they had been baking on the morning of August 24th, 79 AD, the day Mount Vesuvius erupted. They were carbonized by the intense heat, transformed into brittle relics, but their shape still clear, still Roman, round, flat, divided into 8 symmetrical wedges, like a wheel or a flower. This design made the bread easy to break apart and portion. No knives required. Each segment could be torn free, shared, traded, or carried away. Some loaves bore stamps, pressed into the dough before baking. These weren't decorative, they were legal. They marked ownership, origin, or the name of the baker. One loaf read, "Of Cala, slave of Quintus Granius Verus." A name, a status, proof that even bread had bureaucracy. These stamps told the officials who received which ration, which bakery delivered which contract, they also told archaeologists something else. That Rome ran on accountability, even at the level of crust. In some cases, loaves were found inside household kitchens, stored on shelves, wrapped in cloth, or tucked into baskets. In others, they were caught mid-delivery, carried by men who fled too late, their bodies found not far from the bread they had been bringing to market. Imagine a final breath taken with the scent of crust still warm, still rising. Today, some of these loaves are on display in museums, behind glass, under soft lights. They look like something out of a dream, familiar, but impossibly old, fragile and blackened, but whole. You can still see the crack lines, the crust, even the rough flour that dusted their sides. They are not symbols, they are bread, real bread, and they waited nearly 2,000 years to be seen again. When archaeologists first uncovered the bakeries of Pompeii and Ostia, one detail left them quietly stunned: the millstones, massive twin-cone stones made of volcanic basalt, standing silent in narrow chambers, each surrounded by a low stone track worn smooth. And beside these millstones, shackles, metal rings, loops in the walls, hoofprints, even the bones of animals. It was here that Rome's quietest laborers walked in endless circles, donkeys, not horses, not oxen. Donkeys, small, hardy, patient, perfect for the slow, heavy work of turning grain into flour. In these rooms, they were harnessed in pairs, blindfolded to keep them calm, and driven forward by handlers with ropes or switches, around and around, hours at a time. No music, no rest, just the scrape of hoof on stone and the deep, slow grinding of grain between stones. You can still see the marks in the stone floor where they walked, narrow paths, curved perfectly with wear. Some bakeries had wooden beams overhead to suspend feed or water. Some didn't. In one bakery in Ostia, an entire room was built just to house them. A stable beside the mill chamber. Simple, low, with grooved floors for drainage and stone troughs for feeding. The donkeys were essential. Without them, flour didn't get made. And without flour, no bread. And without bread, no Rome. The donkey was not honored in statues. It wasn't named in epics. But its footprints are in the floor. And in that quiet imprint, we see the invisible shape of the empire itself, built not just on the strength of legions, but on the circles walked in dust and darkness by creatures that never stopped moving. Among the tools and ovens, among the millstones and the cracked paddles, archaeologists found something unexpected. Altars, tiny ones, modest, tucked into corners, near the heat of the ovens or beside the entrance doors. Some were little more than niches in the wall, shallow recesses where a small figure could stand, its features worn smooth by time and smoke. Others had miniature pedestals, soot-stained and chipped, often decorated with painted bands or simple reliefs. These were leraria, household shrines. But these weren't just for family spirits. Some were dedicated to flour, to grain, to fire, to the invisible forces that allowed the dough to rise, the ovens to burn, and the bread to feed a city too large to fail. In one bakery in Pompeii, a particularly well-preserved lerarium shows painted images of household gods flanked by serpents, symbols of protection and prosperity. Below them, offerings, burned grain, old crusts, a pinch of salt. Simple things, but sacred. Because baking in Rome wasn't just work, it was risk. Too much moisture, the dough collapses. Too little yeast, it hardens. A crack in the oven wall. You lose an entire batch. So a small prayer, a quiet offering, these were insurance against failure. A way of saying, let the loaves rise. Let the fires burn evenly. Let the bread not fail today. Some bakeries even had miniature figures of Fortuna, the goddess of luck. Others favored Vulcan, god of fire and forge. And some simply honored the spirit of the flour itself. Not a god with temples or priests, just a presence, a spirit in the grain. A reminder that even in the most practical corners of Roman life, the divine was always nearby. Not grand, not glorious, just sacred enough to kneel to in the quiet before dawn. Not just ovens and stones, but tools, real tools, stacked near doorways, leaning in corners, rusted or petrified by time. There were wooden peels, long-handled paddles used to slide dough into deep ovens. The handles were worn smooth where hands had gripped them thousands of times. Some even had cloth wraps still clinging to the base, likely to prevent burns or improve grip. Beside them, baskets, woven from reeds or rushes, flat and wide, for proofing dough, for cooling loaves, for carrying bread through the narrow streets of Rome, balanced on shoulders, heads, arms. Some baskets were lined with faded linen, designed to keep the bread from drying too quickly. And the mixing bowls, large, heavy, often carved from stone or made of coarse pottery, wide-mouthed, stained, chips along the rim where ladles knocked too hard. These bowls weren't delicate. They were built to survive the press of elbows, the lean of a baker's full weight as he folded dough again and again. Measuring tools, too. Not measuring cups exactly, but scoops and standard weights. Small lead markers used on scales stamped with values. Accuracy mattered, especially when fulfilling contracts for state rations or private orders. And tucked beside one oven wall in Pompeii, a simple iron knife. Not for slicing, Roman bread was often torn by hand, but for scoring dough, marking patterns, or dividing portions. Even the floors held secrets. Grooved channels led out toward drainage pits to carry away spilled water, excess flour, the remains of ruined batches. Some floors were slightly tilted, helping runoff drain toward one end of the shop. The layout wasn't accidental. The kneading area was usually near the center, the heart of the operation, while the milling space stayed to one side. Ovens were placed near back walls, insulated by thick stone to keep heat contained. Doorways were wide enough for baskets. Storage shelves lined the walls, some reachable only by small wooden ladders. The space was dense but deliberate, optimized not for comfort, but for efficiency. It was work, hard, hot, endless, but every tool tells a story of movement, repetition, survival. And in the way those tools were made, held and worn down, we glimpsed the invisible hands that used them. Hands that didn't sign scrolls. Hands that didn't leave books behind. But hands that fed an empire. If Pompeii gives us a snapshot, a moment preserved in tragedy, then Ostia gives us the long view. Ostia, Rome's ancient port city, sat at the mouth of the Tiber River. It was a place of cargo, commerce, and colossal movement. Grain ships docked there from Egypt and Sicily, their hulls heavy with the lifeblood of the empire. Wheat. And where grain flowed, bakeries followed. The bakeries of Ostia weren't just family shops. They were industrial. Massive spaces, some larger than city villas, arranged not for comfort, but for scale. Wide milling rooms with multiple stone grinders, large ovens, set into thick walls, capable of baking dozens of loaves in a single cycle. Some even had floor plans built around a central corridor, a kind of baking assembly line. You can still see the anchor points for machinery, the drainage systems, the storage bins, where flour was heaped in high stone compartments, ready to be mixed. In some places, you find the faint impressions of shelving, wooden slats long since rotted away, but remembered by the grooves they left behind. This was Rome feeding itself, not with art, not with rhetoric, but with logistics. And behind the logistics, bakers. They weren't artisans here. They were operators, moving between tasks, monitoring donkeys, hauling sacks of flour up steps, down ramps, into mixing troughs. Many were likely slaves, others freedmen. Some perhaps paid laborers, hired seasonally during the busiest grain months. We even find evidence of worker housing, cramped rooms above or beside the bakery floor. Not homes, not sanctuaries, just places to sleep between shifts. The work never stopped. Ostia's bakeries ran day and night. Why? Because Rome never stopped eating. Thousands upon thousands of citizens relied on the annona, the grain dole, a state-run system that ensured bread was distributed to the population. Bakers contracted by the state were required to meet strict quotas. Failure meant fines, or worse. But the reward, stability, a place in Rome's vast machine, a role to play, a name, perhaps, etched in a ledger, or on a loaf, or if fortune smiled, on a tomb. Ostia shows us the scale. Pompeii shows us the human touch. Together, they remind us that ancient bread was never just food. It was a system, a rhythm, a city breathing, fed not by glory, but by grain, fire, and hands that never stopped moving. Picture this. You've just come in from the street, the heat of the oven still on your arms, the flour still clinging to your clothes. You've delivered your basket of loaves, stamped, still warm, to a grand villa on the Palatine Hill. The doorman doesn't speak to you. He takes the bread and vanishes behind marble pillars. You never see what happens next. But let's follow it in your place. That loaf, marked for Dominus, is no ordinary ration. It's a soft white bread, made from the finest imported wheat, sifted again and again, until all the roughness is gone. The flour costs more than you'll earn in a month. It's placed on a silver tray, and carried to a dining room where no one sits in chairs. Because the elite of Rome dined reclining, draped across low couches, fanned by slaves, surrounded by polished frescoes, and the scent of perfume rising from shallow basins of heated oil. Bread here is not the meal. It's a symbol, a starting point, something to be torn, not with hunger, but with ceremony. Loaves are sometimes shaped like fish, sometimes scored into delicate patterns, sometimes dyed or dusted with herbs, and yes, sometimes gilded. Real gold, thin flakes beaten to paper fineness, sprinkled over honey-glazed crusts. The taste means nothing. It's about spectacle, about saying, I can eat what others use as coin. Your bread, still warm from your basket, is sliced with a knife inlaid with mother of pearl. It's passed along a table you'll never touch, to men who do not know your name. The Roman elite didn't eat to live. They dined to display. Banquets, convivia, weren't simply meals. They were orchestrated performances, hours long, often entire evenings, sometimes even days. Not just about flavor, but about status, spectacle, and control. Guests arrived in staggered waves. The most honored ones reclined closest to the host, the dominus. Others, less favored, were seated further down the room, their dishes fewer, their wine less aged. The bread, though, it was everywhere, but not in the form you know, crumbed into sauces, pressed into cakes, soaked in wine and served as sopian, a sweet spiced mush eaten with spoons of ivory, crusts carved with designs, bread fried in oil, drizzled with garum, fermented fish sauce, and sprinkled with poppy seed. There were bread rolls flavored with cheese, herbs, sometimes dates, others stuffed with meats or layered like modern pastries. Every variation a statement. And the waste, monumental. Bread left half-eaten, crumbs brushed off into bowls, platters taken away still full, because the point wasn't the eating. The point was to show abundance, enough to throw away, enough to impress the man beside you, enough to remind every guest you are in the presence of power. And somewhere beneath all of it was your bread, handled, stared at, dissected, but never truly tasted the way you knew it, fresh from the fire, sharp with the scent of olive wood smoke. For the elite, it was just part of the show. At that grand table, under chandeliers of bronze, beside walls painted with gods and myth, your presence is nowhere. There's no toast raised to the baker, no mention of the hands that shaped the dough, no acknowledgement of the heat, the ash, the dark mornings before sunrise. You are not invited. You never are. You hear rumors, of course, from the boy who delivers wine, from the butcher's niece who empties chamber pots for a senator's household. They tell stories of poets reciting verses between courses, of roasted birds served inside larger roasted birds, of dancers, of oysters, of drunken arguments that ended in laughter or exile. You hear that sometimes, at the end of a banquet, a guest will ask where the bread came from, but they won't mean you, they'll mean the shop, the owner. Maybe, if your mark is clear, your master's name will be praised. A nod, a tell him he did well. But your name, it never leaves the bakery. It stays there, in the cracks of the stone floor, in the scalded handles of the paddles, in the soft exhale you give each time a loaf comes out just right. That's your banquet. The moment between fire and silence, between effort and warmth. And that is enough, because Rome eats, and you have fed it. So now the fire has faded, the last loaf has cooled, and the streets of Rome, once full of voices, carts, and clattering sandals, grow quiet beneath the stars. You lie back on your flour sack once more, arms sore, feet dusted in ash. But the air is still. The oven breathes its last warmth beside you, and you listen to nothing. Just the hum of a city that, for all its emperors and monuments, still depends on the hands of those it never names. Hands like yours. You are not carved in marble. No poets sing of you. But you are in the crust they pass around gilded tables, in the rations handed to legionaries at the edge of the empire, in the loaves placed in tombs beside the dead. You are the rhythm beneath Rome's heart, the one who wakes before the city stirs, and sleeps only after it is fed. So let the fire go out, let the flour settle, and let yourself drift soft as ash, gentle as cooling dough, into sleep. Because tomorrow, the ovens will call again, but for now, all is still.